podcast, right? Chalo, let's get to that part of Hart Company. I think what we had done was we had finished part A and part B, as in business risk and risk of material misstatement. The major parts of the question were over, and I had asked you to think of the procedures with respect to goodwill, right? है ना? Task C is the group was formed during the year with the parent company, Hart Company, acquiring its first subsidiary company. Therefore, this is the first time that the group will prepare consolidated financial statements. Using Exhibit 4, justify why the acquisition of Morton Company and the goodwill arising on the acquisition have been identified as significant risk of material misstatement, and then design the principal audit procedures which should be included in the audit plan in relation to the goodwill arising on acquisition of Morton Company. ठीक है. First part is justify why acquisition of Morton and goodwill have been identified as significant risk of material misstatement. What is the reason? Mr. Arora, can you answer that for us? बताइए. Why is acquisition of Morton Company and the goodwill calculation, why does it create a significant risk of material misstatement? ठीक है.
So maybe it's the first time we are acquiring the Morton company, and the calculation it requires complex calculation in the goodwill.
Okay. Now, let's go about this one by one. Today we are also doing that good answer, bad answer thing. Huh? Part C, why is acquisition of Morton Company and the goodwill calculation related to that? Why is it a significant risk of material misstatement? First time consolidation. है ना? Now this is the first acquisition that they have made, right? And the finance and CFS are going to be produced for the first time. First acquisition ever made, and consolidated financial statements are going to be produced for the first time. उससे क्या होगा? What do you think will that lead to? I think management is going to be a little inexperienced in the preparation of consolidated financials and the calculation of goodwill. That may result in significant errors in various components of CFS. Management inexperienced in preparation of consolidated financial statements and goodwill calculation. ठीक है. So chances of errors are higher. है ना? Then may result in significant errors in all of consolidated financial statements. ठीक है. Now, group or the holding company might not be equipped or might not be completely trained in identification of all the intra-group transactions. Group not trained in identification of and accounting for all intra-group transactions, है ना? उनको पता ही नहीं है. So the first point is about knowledge of consolidation process. ठीक है. Then let's talk about individual items in the whole goodwill calculation and first time consolidation. Let's talk about cost of acquisition. Now cost of acquisition में क्या आता है यहाँ पे? What all is there included? Cash consideration paid, deferred consideration. Deferred consideration is contingent on Morton Company theaters achieving revenue targets by 30th September. The amounts become payable on the same date. Management has assumed that the full amount will be payable and has discounted this amount at a rate of 10%. Now, what do you think can be the appropriate point here, cost of acquisition?
So we can talk about the discount rates applied, whether it's consistent with the market trends or not.
Okay,
So also, can we say that the deferred consideration might not be correctly discounted to its present value?
which is exactly, what Trisha also mentioned, right? Now, explain how is cost of acquisition calculated. ठीक है. You will have to mention that there is a present value that is calculated with respect to the deferred consideration, right? PV of deferred consideration is used while calculating cost of acquisition. ठीक है. Now, what is the risk? The risk is that the discount factor applied is not based on the appropriate interest rate, है ना? Discount factor applied is not based on an appropriate interest rate. उससे क्या होगा? So, possibility that the cost of acquisition, and associated liability, ठीक है? Cost of acquisition and associated liability are not correctly calculated. उससे क्या होगा? If cost of acquisition and associated liability are not correctly calculated, under or overstatement. See, always try to mention whether it will lead to understatement or overstatement. Only then you will get adequate credit in the answer. Otherwise नहीं मिलेगा. ठीक है. Now, यहाँ पे see what is one more point that you need to observe about deferred consideration. They have mentioned that deferred consideration is contingent on the company achieving the revenue targets. So is this also under contingent consideration? And tell me if you remember IFRS 3 अपना जो हमने consolidation में देखा था, how do we tackle contingent consideration in the calculation bit?
Measure that at the fair value.
Should be measured at fair value.
Yes.
Just one moment. Huh? ठीक है. Contingent consideration. The point is use fair value. What is the risk? Risk is that fair value is not appropriately estimated, correct? Fair value is not appropriately estimated, that is a risk. And if that is not appropriately estimated, आपका goodwill and associated liability दोनों गलत हो जाएगा, है ना? Now, if amount of consideration changes, if amount of contingent consideration changes as a result of post reporting date event, है ना? then the cost of acquisition and associated liability will have to be what? Will have to be re-estimated. What is the risk? Risk is that they are not re-estimated. Even when the amount of contingent consideration changes. Okay. Then right now there is an uncertainty over the achievement of those revenue targets. What do you think? Deferred amounts become payable on the same date. Management has assumed that full amount will be payable and has discounted this at the rate of 10%. Okay. This much is enough. Then cash consideration. Any risk here with respect to cash consideration? I think that is a number which can very easily be verified by looking at the share purchase agreement and by looking at the bank statement. ये दो sources को अगर आप देखेंगे तो you will get your answer. ठीक है. Now next thing is fair value of identifiable net assets. What risk can you think of here?
Fair value might
Fair
not
value.
have been appropriately calculated, overstatements of assets, and there could be some misstatements in liabilities as well to increase the fair value, maybe.
Okay.
You can also say that not all assets and liabilities have been considered of the subsidiary.
Okay, so you're saying all the identifiable net assets
Yeah,
and
right.
liabilities are not considered. Issue one, issue two, fair value measurement में problem है, which makes it understate, which increases the possibility of a certain amount getting understated or overstated. ठीक है. Then
Certain intangible assets which cannot be considered in standalone financial statements but has to be taken in consolidation.
like in this case, the acquired brand name could be one example for that, right? Okay. So let's discuss that point with respect to identifiable net assets. What are those? First of all identifiable assets and liabilities of subsidiary company are not considered while calculations. ठीक है. Then all these assets and liabilities are not measured at their, or rather all these assets and liabilities fair value is not estimated correctly. ठीक है. Fair value is not estimated correctly. उससे क्या होगा? Again, there could be under or overstatement of the goodwill figure, but before that, assets like internally generated brand name in this case. ठीक है. Assets like internally generated brand name in this case are not considered while calculating the fair value of net assets of subsidiary. Tell me.
The statement you wrote that fair value is not estimated correctly, we can also add that management might not be sufficient enough to carry out the
estimate of fair value.
Management not equipped to perform fair value working as this is the first year. ठीक है, और क्या गड़बड़ होगा इससे? There could be bias also, but ठीक है, वो तो you can write that in all cases. So if net assets are not calculated correctly, then the goodwill figure might be over slash understated. Fair enough? Okay. Then what else with respect to goodwill? Goodwill will get calculated on the date of acquisition, but there is a possibility that goodwill gets impaired by the end of the reporting period. ठीक है? And how do we tackle that? So that is also a risk of material misstatement, that there is impairment of goodwill, and although there is an impairment of goodwill, the risk is that goodwill and other non-current assets are not tested for impairment. And because of that, although goodwill is impaired, it still continues to be shown at its existing value. What do you think? Could that be a risk of material misstatement? है ना?
Yes.
तो impairment, goodwill and other intangible assets. वो जो acquired brand name है, even that will be subjected to impairment, right? Now, these are goodwill and intangible assets with an indefinite useful life have to be tested for impairment at the end of every reporting period. है ना? There are other non-current assets which are tested for impairment only when the indicator of impairment is present. Goodwill and other intangible assets which do not have a definite useful life are tested for impairment annually. Whereas other non-current assets are tested for impairment only if indicator of impairment is present. ठीक है, अब what is the risk? Risk is that goodwill and other intangible assets are not tested for impairment annually. है ना? That is a concern. And if it is not tested for impairment annually, then the amount of impairment loss will not be recorded. And again, the financial statements will be materially misstated. If impairment testing is not done, ठीक है, and when in fact asset is impaired, the risk is that impairment loss is not recorded and goodwill, other intangible is overstated and expenses are understated. ब्रैकेट में लिख सकते हो PBT is overstated. Always talk about the under or overstatement because that is specifically going to fetch you marks in the paper. ठीक है? Okay. 4 risks that we identified. Now let's think about the procedure. 4 risk nahi, 4 reasons why it is a high risk item. We identified that. Now, what do you think is the right set of procedures to be done for calculation of, as in verification of goodwill? The first thing that you will check is अब फॉर्मूला के हिसाब से चलो. What is the first thing written here? Cash consideration paid 1st of October 2004. How will you verify whether this amount is correct or not? What source document is the starting point?
Bank statements.
Bank statement.
Bank statement and the share purchase agreement, right? Bank statement and share purchase agreement. How will you verify the 10 million deferred consideration?
We'll check the share purchase agreement.
Share purchase agreement will also study what conditions have been put in place for the deferred payment, right?
We'll also confirm the timing.
Confirm the timing. Very good. वो जो आपका actual cash paid है 22 million, that can be verified from bank statement. This can be verified only from the share purchase agreement. Then
Confirm percentage of shareholding was
confirm percentage
100%.
shareholding. Very good. In all of these matters, you should always check whether appropriate approvals for acquisition were obtained at the board meeting. ठीक है. Then deferred consideration के लिए what can you do?
We can recalculate the present value of 8.3 to confirm whether it is arithmetically correct or not.
Okay. What assumptions were used in that calculation when you determined 10 million? Plus, how was the discount rate finalized? ठीक है. उसके आगे
Recalculation of the amount to confirm accuracy.
recalculation of the amount to confirm accuracy. But which amount? 8.3 million.
Yes, sir.
Because 22 is very clearly given to you. ठीक है. Recalculation is a fair enough point. Then, don't you think you should see this deferred consideration is payable after 2 years? ठीक है. At the end of first year, which is your reporting date, should you see progress towards achievement of the target? कि 30th September 2005 तक by what percentage and amount has the revenue grown? है ना? वो करो. फिर what else?
So we can also talk about whether the discount rate assumptions ensure the market-based rates are appropriate or not.
Okay.
And also we can recalculate the valuation for customer list
Hmm.
to verify whether the 4 million adjustment for the fair value is correctly reflected in goodwill or not.
Why is that customer list? Why is it so important here?
So because that might be a supporting documentation to verify the 4 million ka fair value.
Yeah, but that I get. But why is it important? The biggest reason is that for the subsidiary, it was an internally generated intangible, right? For the subsidiary, it was an internally generated intangible. For me, it is an acquired intangible. So I'm including that at its fair value. तो उसका अगर वैल्यू गलत होगा तो naturally my goodwill calculation will go for a toss. So that is important. What else? Can we do something about the customer list? Something more? Does something come to your mind?
Or external valuation report can be obtained.
Okay, and why is that?
Um, Morton's management uh, might just increase the valuation of the customer base so that they can
Okay. See, while I
sell the share at the highest amount.
okay. While I asked you about this, you are not supposed to write this in the paper. You are just supposed to write the procedures. आपने जो बोला वो बात बराबर है, बट वो पेपर में लिखना नहीं है, अदरवाइज यू विल एंड अप लूजिंग मार्क्स. सो एक्सपर्ट वैल्यूएशन ऑफ कस्टमर लिस्ट, देन सी यू आर कंसिडरिंग फेयर वैल्यू ऑफ नेट असेट्स, है ना. फेयर वैल्यू ऑफ नेट असेट्स में देयर विल बी लाइबिलिटीज ऑल्सो विच आर इन्वॉल्व. तो वो लाइबिलिटीज का फेयर वैल्यू यू विल हैव टू एस्टिमेट. देन व्हाट एल्स. So fair value of liabilities and all of those points are also important. ठीक है. What else can you think about here? Mostly तो cover हो गया है.
Any revaluation adjustments to be included to confirm that they have been included, their completeness?
Okay. Fair enough. Then
If there are any intangible assets such as patents or developments,
वो तो है.
and
तो वो ऐसा डेटा कहाँ पे दिया है कि देयर आर और देयर आरंट. अब ये अपना इंटरप्रिटेशन आ रहा है उसमें. अब बिकॉज यू नो वी हैव रन आउट ऑफ वैलिड पॉइंट्स, तो नाउ यू आर एडिंग योर जनरल नॉलेज. वो नहीं करना है. ठीक है. एक बार जस्ट गो थ्रू द प्रोसीजर्स, सेम पॉइंट्स दैट वी हैव डिस्कस्ड. एक बार देखो.
can we add that if the customer list have been impaired, such as indicators of loss of major amount of customers?
दैट यू कैन. दैट यू कैन.
Scroll.
ठीक है?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what we did today was we just finished the first part of as in section A, question 1 हमने देख लिया. Now, I specifically told you that I'm only focusing on the content. I'm not focusing on the presentation in the session so far. Now I want to divert our attention to basically understanding what separates a good answer from a bad answer and how exactly does ACCA give you marks on this topic. Okay, so there's a publication, every for every subject, by the way. ACCA publishes this ideal answer strategy. Specifically in theory papers, I think it comes in very, very handy. It might not be so useful in, say, an SBR, AFM, or ATX, but in a subject like AAA, SBL, or APM, it comes in very handy. So, the next part of the discussion, I'm going to be focusing on how to frame that ideal answer. Now, there's a link that I'm sharing on the chat box. Okay. I just want you to go through that. Everyone.
Yes.
Yes, sir.